My name is Hazel Carter, and I'm 29 years old. I teach high school mathematics in a suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. Numbers have always made sense to me in a way people sometimes don't. There's comfort in equations, in problems that have clear solutions. My classroom sits on the second floor of Lincoln High, overlooking the soccer field where students gather during lunch, their laughter drifting through my open window on warm days. I've been teaching here for 5 years, and in that time I've built something I'm proud of, a reputation for turning struggling students into confident problem solvers. But lately, the biggest problem I've been facing doesn't have a formula, and it definitely doesn't have an answer key. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started 3 months ago, subtle at first. My husband Ryan would come home later than usual, his explanations vague and dismissive. Just drinks with the team, he'd say, tossing his keys on the kitchen counter without meeting my eyes. Ryan works in sales for a tech company, the kind of job where networking is both an excuse and a requirement. At first, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 4 years, together for 7. Trust was supposed to be our foundation. But then the late nights became later. 10 o'clock turned into midnight. Midnight crept toward 2 in the morning. I'd lie awake in our bedroom, watching the ceiling fan spin slow circles in the dark, my phone charging on the nightstand, no text messages explaining where he was. The first few times I asked about it, he laughed it off. "Babe, you worry too much. I'm a grown man." The dismissiveness in his tone felt like a door closing between us. Last Tuesday changed everything. I'd spent the evening grading calculus exams at the dining room table, red pen in hand, my cat Pepper curled up on the chair beside me. The clock on the wall ticked past 11, then 11:30. My phone sat face up on the table, silent. I texted Ryan at 10 asking when he'd be home. No response. At midnight, I called. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. My chest tightened, that familiar knot of worry mixed with something sharper, frustration, maybe anger. When I finally heard his car pull into the driveway at 1:45 in the morning, I was still awake. The front door opened quietly, like he was trying not to disturb me. I stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, my exhaustion written across my face. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady but tired. Ryan looked up, surprised to see me awake. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and he smelled faintly of bourbon and cologne that wasn't his usual brand. "Out," he said simply, kicking off his shoes. "Out where?" "I texted you hours ago." He sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they're annoyed at being questioned. "I was with clients, Hazel. Important clients. You know how this works." "At 2 in the morning?" "Yeah, at 2 in the morning." His voice had an edge now. "What is this, an interrogation?" "It's a question. I'm your wife. I think I deserve to know where you are." That's when he rolled his eyes. Actually rolled them, like I was being unreasonable. "You're not my mom, Hazel. I don't need a curfew." The words hit me like cold water. Not because they were loud or cruel, but because they were casual, like he'd been thinking them for a while and finally decided to say them out loud. I stood there, staring at him, this man I'd promised my life to, and felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet. Something colder. Clarity. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the argument still replaying in my head. Ryan was asleep beside me, his back turned, breathing heavy and unbothered. I got up quietly, made coffee in the kitchen while the sun rose over the neighborhood, and stared out the window at the empty street. Pepper rubbed against my legs, purring softly, the only comforting presence in the house. I thought about what Ryan had said. "You're not my mom. I don't need a curfew." The more I turned it over in my mind, the angrier I became. Not because I wanted to control him, but because he'd made caring about him sound like nagging. He'd taken my worry and twisted it into something unreasonable, something to dismiss. And the worst part? He'd done it so easily, like he'd been practicing. At school that day, I moved through my classes on autopilot. My students worked through quadratic equations while I stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, my mind somewhere else entirely. During lunch, my colleague and friend Monica stopped by my classroom. She teaches English down the hall, and we've been close since my first year at Lincoln. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "You okay?" she asked, settling into one of the student desks. I hesitated, then told her everything. The late nights, the dismissiveness, the eye roll, the curfew comment. Monica listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to something harder. When I finished, she leaned back and shook her head. "Hazel, that's not okay. You know that, right?" "I know," I said quietly. "But what am I supposed to do?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Accuse him of something I can't prove? Start a fight every time he's late? Or, Monica said carefully, you figure out what's really going on. Because this isn't just about late nights. This is about respect. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, I sat at my laptop in the spare bedroom we'd turned into an office, staring at a blank document. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew I needed answers. And I knew Ryan wasn't going to give them to me willingly. So I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the details I'd been too trusting to notice before. I started noticing things I'd been too comfortable to question before. The way Ryan's phone was always face down on the counter when he came home. How he'd started showering immediately after walking through the door, even on nights when he claimed he'd just been at the office. The credit card statements that showed charges at restaurants I'd never heard him mention, bars in parts of the city he had no business being in for work. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was just looking at what had always been there, seeing it clearly for the first time. On Thursday night, Ryan came home at 11:30. Earlier than usual, which somehow made it worse because it proved he could come home at a reasonable hour when he wanted to. He found me in the living room, curled up on the couch with a stack of papers from school. "Hey babe," he said casually, like the past few months hadn't happened. "You still up?" "Grading," I replied without looking at him. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down in the armchair across from me. "You know, you've been kind of distant lately." I looked up then, my pen pausing mid-sentence. "I've been distant?" "Yeah. I feel like you're always on my case about something." The audacity of it took my breath away. Here he was, coming home at all hours without explanation, and somehow I was the problem. I set my papers down carefully. "Ryan, you've been coming home past midnight almost every night for 3 months. When I ask where you've been, you either ignore me or act like I'm being controlling. How exactly am I the one being distant?" He took a long sip of his beer. "I told you, it's work. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under right now. This promotion isn't going to land itself." "What promotion?" He blinked. "The regional manager position. I've been telling you about it." "No, you haven't." "Yes, I have. You probably weren't listening." He said it so matter-of-factly, like my memory was the issue, not his lies. I felt something harden in my chest. "When did you apply for this promotion?" "A few months ago." "Why does it matter?" "And you never thought to actually sit down and tell me about it? To explain that this was why you'd be out late?" He shrugged. "I didn't think I needed permission." "I'm not asking for permission, Ryan. I'm asking for basic communication. I'm asking to be treated like your partner, not some obstacle you have to work around." He stood up, clearly done with the conversation. "You're being dramatic. I'll be in bed." And just like that, he walked away, leaving me sitting there with my unfinished grading and a marriage that felt like it was unraveling faster than I could hold it together. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I called Ryan's office. Not to check up on him, but to speak with his assistant, a cheerful woman named Kim who'd always been friendly at company events. I kept my tone light, casual. "Hi Kim, it's Hazel. I'm trying to plan a surprise for Ryan, but I need to work around his schedule. Has he been working late on that big client project?" There was a pause on the other end. "Client project?" "Yeah, the one that's had him at the office until midnight most nights." Another pause, longer this time. "Hazel, Ryan usually leaves by 6. He hasn't worked late in months, not since the Henderson account closed in February." My hand tightened around my phone. "Oh, I must be confused then. Thanks, Kim." I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking. Not with sadness, not yet, but with a cold, clarifying rage. He'd been lying. Not just stretching the truth or exaggerating work demands, but flat out lying about where he was spending his nights. And he'd done it so confidently, so easily, like I was too naive or too trusting to ever question him. That weekend, Ryan announced he was going golfing with some coworkers on Saturday afternoon. He'd be gone most of the day, maybe grab dinner with them after. I nodded, smiled, told him to have fun. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I went upstairs to our bedroom. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to find something, anything, that would give me the full picture. His dresser drawers held nothing unusual. His closet was exactly as messy as always. But when I checked the pockets of the jacket he'd worn earlier that week, I found a receipt. Dinner for 2 at an upscale Italian place downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and wine lists thicker than textbooks. The date was last Tuesday, the night he'd told me he was working late on a presentation. The total was $170. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the receipt in my hand. The math teacher in me started calculating. 3 months of late nights. Dozens of lies. $170 dinner he never mentioned. It all added up to one undeniable conclusion, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Not until I had more than suspicions and receipts. Not until I had proof solid enough that he couldn't talk his way out of it. So I started planning. Not revenge, not exactly, but something quieter and more deliberate. I started building a case, the way I'd teach my students to solve a complex problem. Gather your data, identify the variables, test your hypothesis. And most importantly, don't let your emotions cloud the logic. Because the truth was coming, one way or another. And when it did, I was going to be ready. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started keeping a journal, writing down every time Ryan came home late, every excuse he gave, every detail that didn't add up. I checked our joint bank account regularly, screenshotting transactions before he could notice I was paying attention. There were charges at hotels, though he'd never mentioned business trips. Bar tabs at places 40 minutes outside our neighborhood. Venmo payments to someone named Jessica with a little cocktail emoji in the description. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Monica kept asking if I was okay, and I kept telling her I was handling it. The truth was, I wasn't sure what handling it meant anymore. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe there was an innocent explanation I hadn't considered. But then Ryan would come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, and those doubts would evaporate like steam. On a Wednesday evening, Ryan's coworker Brad posted photos from what he called guys' night at a sports bar. I saw the notification pop up on my phone while I was making dinner. Out of curiosity, I opened it. There was Brad, Ryan, and 2 other men from the office, all grinning at the camera with beers in hand. The timestamp showed 7:30. Ryan had told me that morning he'd be out until at least midnight for a client dinner. I zoomed in on the photo, studying every detail. The TV in the background showed a basketball game I recognized from the sports channel I'd had on earlier. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan at 9:15. Still at dinner, probably be late. Don't wait up. I looked at the message, then back at Brad's photo from less than 2 hours ago. The math didn't work. If he'd been at a sports bar with coworkers at 7:30, where was he now? I texted back a simple, okay, be safe, and went back to my journal, adding this new piece to the puzzle. The following Saturday, everything came together in a way I hadn't expected. Ryan had left for another supposed golf outing, and I'd decided to run errands downtown. I was walking out of the bookstore on Maple Street, carrying a bag of novels I'd probably never have time to read, when I saw them. Ryan and a woman I'd never seen before, sitting at an outdoor cafe 3 blocks from where he'd told me the golf course was. She was blonde, young, probably mid-20s, and she was laughing at something he'd said with her hand resting on his arm. I froze on the sidewalk, my heart hammering in my chest. They were close, intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. He wasn't in golf clothes. He was wearing the navy button-down I'd bought him for his birthday, the one he said made him feel confident. She was wearing a sundress and oversized sunglasses, and everything about the scene looked like a date. A very comfortable, very familiar date. I didn't approach them. Instead, I stepped into the doorway of a nearby shop and took out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the camera app, but I managed to take 3 photos before they stood up to leave. He had his hand on the small of her back as they walked toward the parking garage. That gesture, so casual and possessive, told me everything I needed to know. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the scene over and over. When I got back to our house, I sat in the car for 10 minutes, just breathing. Pepper was waiting for me at the door when I finally went inside, meowing for her dinner. I fed her on autopilot, then went upstairs and looked at the photos I'd taken. They were clear enough. Clear enough to prove what I'd suspected, clear enough that he couldn't explain them away. Ryan came home at 7 that evening, whistling as he walked through the door. "Hey babe, how was your day?" he called out, hanging his keys on the hook. "It was enlightening," I said from the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway, still in that navy shirt. "Yeah? Get anything good at the store?" "Some books." "How was golf?" "Great. Shot under par for the first time this season." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost admired the skill of it. "That's impressive," I said, turning back to the dishes I was washing. "Who'd you play with?" "Just Brad and some guys from the office. You know, the usual group." I nodded slowly, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. "Funny thing, I ran some errands downtown today. Went to that bookstore on Maple Street." I felt him tense behind me, though his voice stayed casual. "Oh yeah? That's a nice area." "It is. Lots of good cafes too. I saw a really cute one with outdoor seating." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I turned around, drying my hands on a dish towel, and looked at him directly. His face had gone pale, but he was still trying to maintain the act. "That's nice," he managed. "I thought so too. Especially since it gave me such a clear view of you and your lunch date." I kept my voice even, almost conversational, but every word landed like a stone dropping into still water. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Hazel, that wasn't what? Wasn't you? Because I have photos that say otherwise. Wasn't a date? Because the way you touched her suggested differently. Or wasn't important enough to mention?" My voice stayed steady, controlled, the same tone I used when explaining complex theorems to students who weren't paying attention. Ryan's face cycled through expressions, confusion, panic, defiance, before finally settling on something that looked like resignation. "She's just a friend. Friends don't look at each other the way you two were looking at each other. Friends don't require lies about golf courses and client dinners." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos. "Want to try again?" Ryan stared at the photo on my phone for a long moment before his shoulders sagged. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Okay, fine. Yes, I've been seeing her. But it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I said, crossing my arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." He moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. "Her name is Jessica. We met at a conference 6 months ago." We started talking, became friends, and then it just kind of happened. But Hazel, I swear, nothing physical has happened. We just talk. She understands the pressure I'm under at work. And I don't. The words came out sharper than I intended. I'm your wife, Ryan. I've listened to you complain about work for 4 years. But apparently, I wasn't understanding enough, so you needed to find someone else? It's different with her. She works in the same industry. She gets it in a way you can't. I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. So this is my fault? I'm not in sales, so I'm not capable of being supportive? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. How long were you planning to keep this up? The lies, the late nights, the secret lunches? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. I kept telling myself I'd end it, that it didn't mean anything. But then I'd see her again and, he stopped, realizing he was making it worse. And what? You'd forget you had a wife at home? You'd forget the vows you made? My voice cracked slightly, the first sign that my composure was fracturing. You made me feel crazy, Ryan. Every time I asked where you were, you acted like I was being unreasonable. You rolled your eyes at me, told me I wasn't your mother, made me feel like caring about my own marriage was somehow wrong. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. Repeatedly. And you kept doing it because it was easier than being honest. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going to pack a bag and stay somewhere else. Your brother's place, a hotel, I don't care. But you're not staying here. His head snapped up. Hazel, wait. Can't we talk about this? Work through it? Work through what exactly? The lying? The cheating? Because yes, Ryan, emotional affairs are still cheating. Or should we work through the part where you gaslit me for months, making me doubt my own instincts? I'll end it with her. Right now. I'll call her and tell her it's over. He reached for his phone desperately. I held up my hand. Don't. Not for me. If you end it, do it because you actually realize what you've done, not because you got caught. So that's it? You're just giving up on us? I'm not giving up, I said firmly. I'm choosing myself. There's a difference. I stood up, pushing the chair back. You have until tomorrow afternoon to get your things. I'll be at Monica's, so you won't have to see me. Leave your key on the counter when you're done. Hazel, please, don't. My voice was steady now, resolved. You had months to please. Months to come home at a decent hour, to be honest, to remember you had a wife who loved you. You chose not to. So now I'm choosing to. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, Pepper following at my heels. Behind me, I heard Ryan make a phone call, his voice low and urgent. I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed, finally letting the tears come. Not for him, not anymore. But for the version of us that I'd thought we were, the future I'd imagined that was never quite real. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica asking if I was okay. I typed back that I needed a place to stay tomorrow and could I come over tonight to talk. Her response was immediate. Doors always open. I'm here. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book I'd already read. Ryan moved out that weekend, and the house felt different without him. Not empty exactly, just clearer, like I'd opened windows that had been painted shut for years. The divorce papers were filed within a month. He didn't contest anything, which told me he knew how badly he'd messed up. At school, I threw myself into teaching with renewed energy. My students noticed the change, though they couldn't name it. I was lighter somehow, more present. During one particularly difficult calculus lesson, a student named Emma stayed after class looking frustrated. I don't get it, Mrs. Carter. No matter how hard I try, I can't make this equation work. I looked at her work and smiled. That's because you're trying to force a solution that doesn't exist. Sometimes the answer isn't to keep trying the same approach. Sometimes you need to recognize when something's fundamentally broken and start fresh. She blinked at me. Are we still talking about math? Always, I said with a knowing smile. Word got around somehow, the way it always does in small communities. Other teachers started sharing their own stories with me during lunch breaks. Women who'd stayed too long, who'd doubted themselves, who'd finally chosen different. We formed an unexpected support system, bound by the shared experience of rebuilding. 6 months after Ryan left, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked thinner, tired. Jessica was with him, and the easy comfort I'd seen at that cafe was gone. They looked tense, strained. He saw me first and his face went pale, but I just nodded politely and continued shopping. As I passed, I heard her say, "Is that her?" in a tone that suggested she'd heard plenty about me. I smiled to myself, wondering how long it would take her to realize that men who cheat with you will eventually cheat on you. I bought ingredients for a nice dinner, treating myself the way I should have been treated all along. At home, Pepper greeted me with her usual enthusiasm, and I realized something profound. I didn't miss Ryan. I missed the idea of what we were supposed to be, but not the reality of what we'd become. That night, I sat at my dining room table, the same one where I'd graded papers while waiting for him to come home, and I started working on something new. Not lesson plans or divorce paperwork, but a blog post about recognizing your worth before someone else's actions make you question it. I titled it, "When Caring Becomes Convenient to Ignore," and hit publish without overthinking it. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from women and men alike, sharing their own stories of being dismissed, gaslit, made to feel unreasonable for having standards. My little blog post had struck a nerve, touching people who'd felt the same quiet desperation I had. Monica called me that night, excited. "Hazel, have you seen the comments? People are sharing it everywhere." "I know," I said, slightly overwhelmed. "I didn't expect this." "You told the truth. That's powerful." She paused. "Are you okay though?" "Really?" I looked around my quiet house, at Pepper sleeping peacefully on the couch, at the life I was building that was completely mine. "Yeah," I said, meaning it. "I really am." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.